What are some downright disturbing facts you know? Hundreds of dead babies were found in the septic tank of a mother and baby home in Twem, Ireland. No one has any idea how many children died under the system countrywide, or how many children were forcibly taken from their mothers and sold to childless families abroad. A lot of these babies' mothers were pressured into giving them up, either by the church for being single mothers or by fathers who couldn't afford to feed the kids. Many were promised when they were in better situations they would be given their kids back. Lots of the children sold abroad were indentured servants. They weren't even adopted out of charity or to make up for parents not being able to have kids of their own. They were often made to work on farms and in factories. While still children, they could eventually potentially buy their freedom, provided they scraped up enough cash. For some, joining WW1 was an escape route from being a servant for life. Source: my great-grandfather was sold to a farm in Manitoba with his brother. They joined the war effort at 14 and 12 to escape it. Their mom was told the church home would care for them till she and her husband were on their feet again. They were sold within a year of arriving at the home, and it took up until I think the 50s or 60s for my great-grandfather and his brother to finally find their remaining family in Europe. Only 1% of arsonists are convicted. Only 10% of arsons are even solved. In the old days, poor people would sell their teeth to rich people. SUDEP: sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. There's a small chance 1/1,000 per year on average that someone with epilepsy will just die during their sleep. There are a lot of theories, but no real reason for this has ever been found. Edit: wow, this really blew up. I was expecting it to get buried beneath all of the other comments. I'm an epileptic like so many of you here. Hopefully this post will raise some awareness. A hoarder had her house filled so much she didn't even notice that her son had passed in her home. Ever thought about how whales and dolphins die? When they get too old and too weak to swim up to the surface to breathe, they start to slowly sink towards the deep, cold depths of the ocean and suffocate in the dark. Lobotomies were a complete guessing game, and the procedure's success was mostly based on whether or not the patient was deemed calm and quiet post-surgery. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized lobotomies in America, was and even a surgeon. He had to partner with an actual surgeon to attempt the procedure, but Freeman didn't care for the length of the surgery, so he invented the ice pick lobotomy. Use an ice pick to access the brain by hammering the pick through the bone above the eye near the nose, and then just wiggling it around. As stated before, Freeman was not a surgeon, so when the actual surgeon he partnered with walked into their shared office to find Freeman with an ice pick halfway in a patient's brain, their partnership ended immediately. But that didn't stop Freeman from continuing his work with lobotomies. He toured the nation in a van he called the Lobotomobile, offering the procedure to insane asylums with problem patients. Freeman completed over 3,000 lobotomies throughout his career, of which nearly 500 patients died and 1,000 were left in a vegetative state. Edit: thanks for the awards. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, a false alarm at a Soviet bunker indicated the launch of multiple American nuclear missiles. Everyone in the bunker except for one man, Stanislav Petrov, thought it was a real attack, but Petrov correctly assumed that if the USA was to launch an attack, it would even hundreds of bombs, leading him to not tell higher-ups who likely would ordered a counterattack, leading to nuclear war about the missiles, likely saving billions of lives. TL: Doctor, we were a single-person decision away from a full-out nuclear war. In 1972, a plane crashed in the Andes on a snowy mountain. 16 of the 45 people, mostly guys of a rugby team from Uruguay, survived there for 72 days. They had to eat the human flesh of the people who died during or after the crash in order to survive. Knew where the plane crashed exactly, and they were only found because 2 of the guys walked for 10 days over the mountains and down into a valley where a farmer found them. Edit: they found a camera in the luggage and took photos of themselves. Most of them are online, and you can even see parts of the bodies, bones and flesh laying around. I don't recommend looking them up if you're really sensitive. When the German battleship Bismarck went down after hours of constant battering, 1,500 of the 2,000-men crew were able to jump into the ocean. The Royal Navy rescued 500 of them, but left early due to lack of fuel and the threat of submarines. Over 1,000 men were left on the ocean to die, having just survived pure hell. Today the area of the wreck is littered with thousands of leather boots, having once belonged to the crew which died because they were abandoned. The average age of the crew was little over 20 years. In the 90s, a British Airways pilot was sucked out of the cockpit at 23,000 FT due to a poorly installed window seal failure, and he got pinned against the airplane as the flight attendants tried to keep him from completely getting sucked away, but he survived, suffering only a few bone fractures and frostbite. The crew of Challenger likely survived over a minute after the initial explosion. They were killed by the impact on the water. There is evidence that members of the crew even started trying to complete the emergency procedures. I recently learned this, and maybe I'm stupid for not knowing already. The human has two anal sphincters. The first one we have no control over, but the second one of course we can control. When the stool comes through the first sphincter, the urge to go to the bathroom is felt. The Japanese brutalities during the Nanjing massacre was so extreme. The head Nazi representative in the region complained directly to Hitler about it. There are more bones in gummy worms than actual worms. Where's our drowning machines? Those tiny dams you see on rivers are shaped like this, kinda under the water, and this shape causes a circular flow of water. As the water circulates, it gets aerated, lowering the density. So if you swim in one, not only are you trapped on the longest spin cycle, but you can't get out because the water isn't dense enough to swim in. NASA was once talking with Sesame Street to send Big Bird into space on the Challenger rocket, but they went with a teacher instead, which means that in an alternate universe close to ours, Big Bird was a casualty in the Challenger disaster. The police once helped Jeffrey Dahmer kill someone. Dahmer had performed a homemade lobotomy on 14-year-old Conoric Synthesiphone. Dahmer had left the boy alone while he went out, and miraculously Synthesiphone managed to actually escape his apartment despite being cognitively impaired from the lobotomy. He worked his way out to the street where a group of women discovered him. Being rightfully concerned for the boy, they called the police for assistance. The police arrive and mistake the boy for being drunk. The group of women grew frustrated as it was clear the cops weren't taking the situation seriously. During this time, Jeffrey Dahmer made his way back home and discovered the unfolding situation. Dahmer was quickly able to manipulate the situation into his favor. He convinced the cops that the Conoric Synthesiphone was really his young boyfriend and that he was just drunk. The cops believed him, much to the dismay of the group of women, and returned the poor boy to Jeffrey Dahmer, sealing his fate. Chlamydia is so rampant among koalas that some populations have tested 100% positive, and it one of the main reasons the koala population is decreasing. In the 1940, before the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the US made around 1.5 million Purple Hearts in anticipation of casualties. Since the bombings occurred, there was quite a surplus of hearts left over. Thus some of those very hearts are still given out to this day. Inuit have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. In Canada, the incidence is 10 times that of the rate of the rest of the Canadian population. Inuit 25 and under are driving the rate. One large study found that 80% of the suicides were by hanging. The same study found that about 1 in 6 of those who died by suicide were victims of sexual abuse. That a man with half his brain blown out the back of his head and the top of his skull missing can still blink, look at you and attempt to form words. There was a serial killer in the 19th to 20th century who murdered, raped, and cannibalized children and would send letters to their parents describing how their children tasted. Truly one of the most sickening men in recent memory. Edit. Humans, not men. When your immune system recognizes that you have eyes, you'll turn blind, and there's nothing you can do about it. When JAL Flight 123 suffered a sudden decompression and crashed at Mt. Atsutaka. After 32 minutes of struggling, the initial forward team that went to assess the situation saw it an area they thought was completely devoid of life, and they went by helicopter. They waited until the next day to go there, not expecting anyone to have survived. There were, in fact, many people who could have survived had they received appropriate care. The only 4 survivors relate that they heard the cries and moans of the wounded, including children, that gradually died off through the night until the next day. Edit. Total loss of life, 520 people. The deadliest single aircraft incident in aviation history, and the 4th deadliest incident in general after the Tenerife disaster and United Airlines flights 175 and 11, which are their own litany of pure confusion, terror, and unimaginable tragedy. The last 2 were the airplanes used to strike the Twin Towers. I was cleaning the garage with my mom shortly after my dad died, and I found a very long, very sad breakup letter from my dad to my mom dated July 2, 1985. I asked her about it. what happened, and she kind of chuckled and went, oh, we got everything sorted out the next day and we're back together again. I was born 9 months later on April 1st, 1986. I was the product of makeup, sex, and had a letter in my hand that started the events of my existence. There are people in Manila, Philippines who are literally scrounging for food scraps on a hill of garbage to recook and sell it. Locals call it pag-pag, meaning to brush off the dirt. In Japan, 1945, 144 Dutch soldiers were beheaded after being forced to watch their wives getting hacked to death with swords and their children being thrown down a mineshaft. Those were different times. An adult blue whale's veins are so large that a small child can not only fit but swim through them if you make them. My grandma never let her daughter my aunt see her dad, so my great-grandma would take her over there on the weekends and leave her there for a few hours, then come and get her. That happened for a few years, but we later found out she was getting molested. People are horrible.